All right, Nancy, could you tell me again why we're doing this?
We're doing it because there is nothing that's interesting to the average person on the internet about the drug industry, how drugs are made, why they're expensive. There's lots of technical know-how. You can run around, see all the podcasts about the latest breakthrough in this technology, usually with some scientists, but it gets very complex. But there's nothing that just says, why do we have this drug industry like we have it in the US? So I wanted to be able to start to have some fun, bring this down to layman's terms, help explain what's going on to people, and get feedback from people who call in too.
Okay,
What should
so
we be doing differently?
so here's some feedback, and this is from an old cynical journalist, which is slightly repetitive, but part of the problem is we don't trust pharma, particularly big pharma.
Not at all.
So the average person might think, oh, is this just going to be a show for the pharmacy industry?
Absolutely not.
So
And
tell me why. Maybe you should explain to folks who you are.
yeah, okay, so 40 years in the industry, a long time, came up through the ranks in Big Pharma, then switched over, actually went to this what's called the service side, which is part of the industry that provides services to the pharma industry. Did that for a number of years and then went over to the smaller biotech side. So I was CEO, and now I sit on a couple of boards. So I know the industry really well. I know its warts and I know its strengths, and I'm not afraid to critique it. And I think we need to be able to do that. Look, we're not here to say that we've got all the answers, but I sure as hope that we can at least start to get some answers and listen to people a little bit and explain a little bit more why it costs so much to bring drugs to market. Because I think there's misunderstandings on both sides, big pharma and the consumer, as well as biotech and the consumer.
All right.
And let's not leave out the PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, and the insurance industry. They play a big part in this too.
Okay, we're not going to get to all of that, but we're going to get to some of
No.
it in the next 25 minutes. Welcome to the inaugural podcast of the RX Files. The RX Files is produced by the Vanguard Network for Leadership. Vanguard's mission is unlocking high potential leadership by organizing events, publishing content, and connecting C-suite leaders. More information is at thevanguardnetwork.com. And we are thrilled to recognize and thank Syneos Health, our generous sponsor, for their support in making this podcast possible. Their commitment to advancing biopharmaceutical solutions helps drive meaningful progress in healthcare. Thank you, Syneos Health. All right, a lot of stuff to cover in the next 25 minutes or so. Basically, we're going to talk about how drugs get from somebody's brain, somebody's idea for a great drug, to my bathroom medicine cabinet. So a lot of things to talk about. One of the people here to help us talk about that is Jay Galeota. He is president and CEO of Kallyope. And Jay, why don't you talk a little bit about what your company do?
Sure. Happy to. It's great to be here, first of all, and thanks for the opportunity. I am privileged to lead a company called Kallyope. It's my third or fourth company over my career, most of which began at Merck, which kind of gave me a different perspective than the one that you get in particularly in research-based biotech, which is where
That's for
Kallyope
sure.
is. Yeah, and so Kallyope was started actually by a bunch of people who I worked with at Merck many years ago. The founding scientist is a person named Nancy Thornberry, who discovered Januvia. She was the co-discoverer of the drug that became Januvia and Janumet, which were two of the biggest drugs in the history of the industry, certainly in Merck's history. And she and a couple of other top scientists, including the other co-discoverer, Ann Weber, started off with Kallyope years ago, thinking that the science had advanced to a point where really smart people could systematically map the complex neurocircuitry in the vagus and enteric nervous system.
Okay,
And that's
hold on, Jay. You got to explain that. Lower it down a little bit. What the heck is the vagus system? Explain that.
okay. Yeah, like most complex things, there's a root of core circuitry that helps to kind of keep the systems running, and the body and the brain have to communicate extraordinarily frequently and with high degree of precision in order to maintain healthy living homeostasis, normal physiology. And so it's still really kind of a big, as most of science is, a big kind of black box into how this really works. But for the first time, Nancy and others believed that we could map these signaling pathways, kind of like a circuit board, if you will, between in the two main nervous systems. And I'm not a scientist. I have a biology degree, but I don't profess by any means to be a scientist. But essentially, these are the two main highways of communication. And so the scientists at Kallyope started doing the research, and with a proprietary platform, they developed ways to elucidate these very discrete neurosignaling pathways, and in the process of doing so, believed that they would identify novel drug targets. And sorry?
That leads me to the first question, which is,
Yeah.
so what drives the development of a drug? I mean, in your case, it seems that you have several people
Great
who got
question.
together and said, this is an idea. As opposed to, I mean, does that drive it, or is it the market? Is it like there's this huge problem we want to solve because we'll make a huge amount of money off of it?
Well, I mean, it would be great if it were that simple, right? Where you could say, hey, we need a widget, let's go make one. But science doesn't work that way. It's the most complex layered onion that you could ever imagine, where layers are peeled back slowly and not even in the same order, and different bodies of research in one area reveal a layer of knowledge that has application to another area. And so, if my experience in doing this for quite a while is that Mother Nature reveals herself to us at her pace and very, very discreetly. And in many ways, drug hunters, as they are called, are detectives who are able to look for clues and piece these clues together and determine whether or not there's a pattern that supports a hypothesis. And most of the time, there isn't. Most of the time, it's a dead end. And that's why you see these statistics that we see. And we've experienced this at Kallyope many times, as most, the most successful biotechs that you can think of have gone through the same. The Regenerons of the world was fraught with failure early on, and many more, Vertex, et cetera. So the idea of a one-hit wonder, it does happen, but to say that it happens in a programmed way, I would have a hard time believing. I think that it's luck more than anything when you have these one-hit wonders.
So, Jay,
And so,
you don't think then that there's a conspiracy to prevent future successful drugs to come and cure diseases, because that way Big Pharma would lose out on profits? Because I got to tell you, there's a lot of people who think that,
yeah,
particularly
no,
when it comes to
yeah.
cancer.
Well, it's easy to, I mean, there are a lot of people who think a lot of things, and conspiracies are intriguing, and they can be compelling for those reasons. But I can tell you that I'm not a subscriber of that in the least. I mean, I've seen how hard it is to do novel science, and when you see people suffering and you want to do something about it, really the only tool we have on a large scale to really affect the health and wellness of humankind is science. It takes time. It's fraught with risk.
So Jay, why is the pharma industry so bad at explaining that story?
Well, I don't know. I can't, I wrestled with this for my many years at Merck, and felt that we had a reputational disconnect between the energy and effort and resources that were put behind advancing truly novel therapeutics, drugs that work, not just that, are sensationalized or marketing schemes, but therapeutics that were novel, that advanced healthcare. And my litmus test for that always, by the way, was, is our medical textbooks rewritten because of this science? And thankfully, over my years at Merck, they were many times, and I was able to be involved in several of those those new therapies that literally changed the way medicine is prescribed and medicine is practiced. So legitimate medicines are gifts to the world, and they are extraordinarily rare, and they are extraordinarily hard to find, which makes them rare. It's not easy to be able to come up with new medicines. And that's why it takes so long. It's not because there's some concerted conspiracy to keep new medicines off the market. It's because it's really hard. It's bench research that occurs primarily at small biotechs. The big pharmas do it, but the majority of it is it's a diffuse model around the globe. And academics, there are insights that come out of labs, and almost every major research academic center certainly in the US has a technology transfer office to spin new companies out of their labs. But most of these companies are funded through venture funding, and the funding is the fuel for everything. And as we already talked about, it takes forever and it's really expensive. So the economic model behind this has to work, or else innovation will really suffer and dry up.
How long does it take to get to the FDA? I mean, to get to...
Well, let's not even talk about that.
To filing?
Let's talk about, let me just walk you through.
Basic 101.
All right. So here's the deal. Let me go back to our little story, right? So we map these neurosignaling pathways. We create atlases, first in an animal, in a mouse, and then in humans.
What's an atlas?
An atlas is a map. It's the circuit board. It's the roadmap, right, of these neurosignaling pathways in our case. We believe that by doing this, we'll identify novel drug targets, and we do. We've identified several. That's the very first step, identification of a novel target. Second step is validating it. First, it has to be validated in animals and in laboratory. So in vitro and in vivo, you have to know that the target does what you think it's going to do, and you have to know that by engaging it in a certain way, you can get it to do something else. That takes a lot of work, right? You can imagine how many experiments have to be done to do that. Then you have to
explain for our audience in vivo and in vitro.
Okay, in animals or on cells under microscopes or CM or whatever, whatever technology you're using these days. So experiments in the labs, picture wet labs. You validate the target. So now you have something to go after. Well, now you have to create composition of matter to actually engage that target. So that means series of chemical structures that are known to be suitable for living organisms to, they don't kill you or they don't cause these terrible toxicities, that actually do what you want them to do. And that takes months, maybe longer and armies of chemists, if you're doing it in the small molecule space, which is almost where you need to be if you want to have medicine adopted at scale, oral medicine, small molecule pill, right? So then eventually you narrow it down to a series. You can imagine why this is taking so long, because it's taking me so long to even describe it. A series, right? A series of viable, all this time you're generating IP, a series of viable chemical structure that you believe one of these could become a PCC, as we call it, a preclinical candidate. So the compound that you're going to actually begin testing for safety and efficacy in animals to determine if there may be a path to go into human beings. So let's say you get through all of that preclinical work, which takes probably 2.5 years to generate the amount of data that you need to support opening an IND, an investigational new drug application. That IND allows you to go into humans, healthy human volunteers, for the first time to determine if the drug is safe, if it causes any side effects, toxicities, and those are done in domiciled studies where patients are monitored very closely every 15 minutes during the period of time that they're given the dose.
So Jay, comment on me about, because I don't know how much our viewers know, but there's a big complaint going on right now that China is beating us on getting to phase 1 because we make it too complicated in the US.
Well, that's, I think that's the two edge of the sword thing, right? The two sides of the sword. On one hand, folks will say that because the FDA requires such rigor, the chance of doing harm to patients is much lower. On the other hand, folks will point out, rightfully, that in other countries, in China is the current example, but for some time South America, Europe, even some European countries would allow more rapid access into human trials. And so where the right balance is there, I think, there's probably a belief, I've certainly heard it expressed many times, that we're overly regulated in the US. On the other hand, folks who make that statement, who are a lot smarter than I am, will immediately point out, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to get to a point where safety is compromised. And so what is the right balance? I don't know the answer to that. I just know how long it takes us to get from a validated target to a drug that we can test in people. And that's usually
And
a
give our
two and a
viewers
half
a
to 3 years.
chance. 2.5 to 3
Important
years. And
number,
what
two
does
and a
that
half to
typically
3 years.
cost? Give it just a rough range. And I know they're wide, but what does
It
that
it
cost?
it really depends on the therapeutic area, so it is wide. But order of magnitude, you're probably in the study variable costs, not including the people who are doing the work or the occupancy costs for the labs and all the other things that cost to run a company. You're probably talking about 10 to 20 million dollars.
Yep.
When you layer on the rest, if you have to carry a company of say 25 or 30 scientists or more for 2 to 3 years, you're probably talking about $50 million. So it's not cheap, and most of these things fail. And
I was about to ask. So you spend $50 million, 2.5, 3 years.
right.
The percentage that fail once they get to human testing.
Well, it's very high. I mean, the statistics are out there, and you guys can look at what
5%,
yeah,
5% ultimately
yeah,
make it to market.
that sounds about
Really?
right. And
So
it's just,
why does anybody make that bet? I mean, that's
Because
well,
we're
because,
crazy.
well, in a way, you could argue that it's philanthropy,
It
but
is.
when you're, and it is the only gift that we have to, improve or eradicate disease, unfortunately. When somebody has an illness and you want to help them and you can't help them, and then, there's a drug now that treats it. I mean, that changes the course of the
It's
world.
wonderful. And Ken, let me just say, most of my colleagues in the industry, we're in it because we want to be able to help human health and human beings
Yeah.
get well. And there brings tremendous psychic um,
Yeah.
um, pleasure and happiness when you can do that. But you have to have the patience of Job in this industry.
Well, well,
So
and
it's
the thing
tough.
is, these gifts, when we get them, when we're able to actually find one that works and advance it, these things are generational. I mean, they surpass all
Mhm.
of the folks who worked on them, and they improve life for generations to come. So it's worthy work. It's really hard. It's really slow, and it's really expensive.
the way I understand it is that if you do come up with a life-saving drug or a life-altering drug, um, you've spent all the money, you've spent all the years, a big pharma will come in and buy it up, right? I mean,
Well,
it's pretty rare that you,
yeah. Well,
small-sized company, go to market.
it's rare, but I can give you a couple of examples off the top of my head in the last couple of years where that's happened. But that's before we get to that though. You said something a minute ago. You said, why do people do it if it's this expensive and
Yeah.
it's this fraught with risk? Because when you're successful, it's extremely lucrative. And those few successes, they cover the cost of all of the failures and then some. And that's why investors invest. And that's why Big Pharma buys companies and advances and brings these medicines to the world, because it's like prospecting. If you drill 1,000 wells and one hits, or dig 1,000 mines and one strikes diamonds, it pays for the whole operation and then some, and it allows you to invest in the future.
I
And so
know, but I
that's
think that's where the public really struggles because they see these companies getting rich. To your point, it's lucrative, and they think, okay, hold on. We're sitting here, we're funding the NIH, and I think there's a big misconception that the vast majority of discoveries come out of the NIH, which is not true. But nevertheless, I understand if I'm the average, fireman, policeman, teacher, whatever, and I'm getting by on a $80,000 a year salary, and I go to the pharmacy and I've got to pay all this money for this drug, and then I see you name the company. I don't want to pick on anybody, that they're, record earnings, and the CEO just made, $1 million plus, in stock grants, and I'm saying, time out. I can barely pay my bills, and now this is going on because that's what they see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that there are a couple of points here. Like there's money that is provided for funding in exchange for a return. So there's a risk return ratio on that money. And then there's money that is taken out of the system for very little risk. And a lot of that comes later, when you start getting into the wholesalers, distributors, insurers, et cetera. there's not a lot of risk relative to the risk that the discoverers, developers, the folks who take the drugs to the world globally, invest hundreds and millions or billions of dollars in doing that. There's a lot more risk on that end of the scale. And so it isn't really highly, well appreciated, I don't think, of how many hands are in the cookie jar, I think was the phrase you used earlier. And that is true. There are a lot of people who want a bite of that healthcare dollar, who are taking a bite of that healthcare dollar, and there are a lot more who take little risk than there are who take large risk. And that might be a lens for us to look through a little bit more carefully. But I can tell you that novel drug discovery is extremely risky, and it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of money, and that system has to work in order to continue to support innovation. And it is working primarily in the US. As we know, most of the innovations are coming from here.
But why is
Still,
that, Jay? Maybe explain why is it, and it's true, just again for our listeners, the vast majority of new drug discoveries are coming out of the US. Now, China's starting to pick up the pace dramatically. So I think we need to pay attention to how are they doing that and what is their system like? But I remember, and I'll just make a quick anecdote. I remember, when I was coming up through the ranks and I was over in Europe all the time, Europe still had a lot of really, really important, viable drug companies, and so many of them have left. And now the whole pendulum has swung over to the US. And so we do generate the vast majority of innovative therapies right now. But maybe you can comment on that some.
Yeah, well, I'm not an economist, and I can't, there are a lot of people who are more informed than I am around why this is the case. But from where I'm sitting, it kind of makes me think that the economic incentives and the regulatory incentives and the ability to get access to really smart people and key talent have all kind of coalesced in this country. And as a result, we've created something that's highly valuable for the world here. And it's been very productive. Albeit slow and risky and expensive, it's been productive. The majority of the world's new drugs come from here, and the rest of the world benefits from that. And that's a good model for us because it works for us and it works for everybody else. I just hope it continues. It has to continue, or else, saying it differently, if the innovation engine in the US slows down, who's going to pick up the slack? Is it going to be China? I mean, some people might suggest they could, but I don't know that we've seen any real sustaining evidence of that yet. So there's a real imperative, I think. And then, of course, you have to look at it from, again, back to economics, which is why I think an economist is the right person to answer this fully. How much of the US GDP is tied up in healthcare? It's enormous. It's a quarter of the GDP maybe, or 20%.
Yeah, at least.
So how can, yes, it's expensive, but by being expensive, it's contributing materially to the overall financial health of the country. And so,
well, yeah, but I'm going to challenge you just a bit because I like to do that. I like to play devil's advocate, which is, we sit here and we say, it's lucrative and it's working, but it's not working for a lot of the average Americans. You get so many people who are filing for bankruptcy because of medical costs. Now, a lot of that, by the way, isn't just drugs. A lot of it is surgeries and hospitals,
it's a broader
issue. But it's not working for a lot of Americans. It's just not. And they're going to sit here and say, yeah, it's great for you guys, and it's great for whoever's getting all these medicines, but it's not working for me. And by the way, I don't want to sit there over in Europe and go over there or to Canada and see these drugs, pennies on a dollar, and we're saying, well, yeah, but look at all these high-paying jobs. I'm not part of the high-paying job economy. I'm part of the middle class or even lower middle class, and I'm certainly not benefiting from this. So I do empathize with that, and I want to figure out how can we fix that.
No, well, there are a lot of people who are not part of the healthcare system, and they're not the beneficiary of the higher paying jobs that healthcare creates. But there are a lot of people who are. That's my point about the majority, the fact that such a large sector of the economy is supported by healthcare, I think makes it harder to summarily lower costs, because in the process of summarily lowering costs, you're impacting GDP, you're impacting the ability to to create jobs. When if a mid-sized pharmaceutical company will probably have the majority of its employees associated with research or quality assurance, quality control. These are usually master's trained science people who generate a reasonably solid salary. It's very expensive to do that work here, by the way, versus overseas. You can do it for pennies on the dollar in other countries that you and I can name readily. But in the where it's still done in the U.S., it's creating high value jobs for people in the U.S. It doesn't make medicines more affordable. It's the other side of the equation is like, what's the retail cost of medicine to the average consumer? What I'm talking about here is the value that healthcare brings to the GDP, which makes it more complicated to just say we have to drive down the cost of healthcare in the US. We really, I think, have to have awareness and a sharper eye on the costs in the middle, because the cost of the drug leaving the loading dock of the factory that makes it for the pharma company is a fraction of the cost that the consumer gets charged. And there are a whole bunch of people in that middle space that that have livelihoods that are based on their quote contribution to that distribution model. And I think we really have been slow to look to take that
Quote
down.
contribution.
Well, it's a relative contribution. That's why it's in quotes. You'd argue that the person, the person taking the risk has a more significant contribution
All right.
than those who are following along.
I suspect that's going to be another show of ours, but we're going to leave that for now.
It would be a good show. It would be a good one.
Right now, we're going to do something called a lightning round. We have 3 questions to ask. I'm going to ask the question. You have to give me a 1-sentence answer. All right. So therefore, lightning. First question: direct-to-consumer advertising. The U.S. and New Zealand are the only countries that allow it. Is that insane, Nancy?
Nope, it's not insane. I'll tell you why. It educates a lot of consumers. It gives them access to information without these gatekeepers everywhere.
1 sentence. Good. Jay.
Not a fan.
Okay. How about
Too much baggage? Too much baggage. I think it scares people as much as anything else. And I think the only people who watch them it's on late night TV, and most people don't get their information on TV via TV ads anymore.
Yeah, ask this podcaster if this drug is right for you. Okay, AI drug discovery. So AI going to discover drugs. That really happening, or is that hype, Nancy?
Oh, no, it's not hype. I think AI is going to be a tremendous advantage in drug discovery.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be an advantage in drug discovery. Whether AI can discover drugs, I think remains to be seen. There's still an aspect of creativity that is nascent in most of the AI platforms. I think AI. Yeah, sorry, I'm more than a sentence.
Yes,
I'll stop.
that's right. Too good. Last one. Should drug patents be shorter? Jay, start with you.
Boy, I think that, it goes back to the economic model. So my answer would be no, to the extent that they jeopardize the return when you're successful, because there's so much failure.
Okay, Nancy?
No, because if you do that, then you're going to see drug prices go up even more, because you got to have time to get your money back on all the hundreds of millions of dollars to bring a drug to market.
All right, this has been great. Jay Galeota, I really thank you for playing along with us. We appreciate it. You can go by
pleasure.
Now. Nancy and I are going to hang around for a few minutes and wrap things up.
Great. Well, thanks for having me again.
Thank you, Jay.
Talk about you.
I mean, these are big issues, and it's provocative and stimulating and
Good luck.
wonderful. Yeah, wonderful to talk with you guys on it.
Yeah, thanks for
All the best.
Yep.
Bye.
Be well. Did we accomplish what we said we were going to try to do?
I think we did. I think that, you know what, are we being, by the way, are we being recorded?
Yes.
Is this part of it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is part of it.
Okay, it's part of it. So, no, I think we did. I think that, look, this is unfortunately, it's complicated. And so it takes time to understand what's going on. And even when you understand, there's certain things that are still going to make people mad, and it still makes me mad. So I think we got a lot of ground that we still can cover and talk about. And I think that we at least started to pull that string a little bit so people understand somewhat what's going on. But you know what? I welcome feedback from people who've listened.
All right, the truth is out there. We're going to try to find it. Thank you for watching the RX Files. Hope to see you next time.
Bye, everyone.